Before Sinai, why Jethro matters. When I first read Exodus 18, one question kept coming back to me. Why is this chapter here? Israel has left Egypt. God has defeated Pharaoh. He parted the sea, provided water in the wilderness, given manna from heaven, and he just delivered Israel from Amalek. We expect the next scene to be Mount Sinai. Instead, the Torah seems to hit the pause button and add this little section. Moses' father-in-law arrives with Zipporah and Moses' son. At first, this almost feels like a family reunion tucked into the story. Ah. But the more I read it, the more I became convinced that this chapter is not interrupting the journey to Sinai. It is preparing us for the journey to Sinai. This chapter opens by saying that Jethro heard everything that God had done for Moses and for Israel. What? Because one of the first questions I had was, what exactly did he hear? The Torah never tells us. This is what we call a lacuna, missing information. Rashi notices the same gap and discusses that perhaps maybe Jethro heard about the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. But even Rashi doesn't really close the gap. Instead, he shows us that Jewish tradition noticed this question too, and we're still wrestling with it. Another question I kept asking was, why did Jethro come personally? He could have simply sent Zipporah and the children back with trusted servants. Instead, he makes the journey himself. The text doesn't tell us why, so I can only wonder. But I wonder if he wanted to see Moses with his own eyes, hear the story firsthand, perhaps be able to ask questions and encourage someone he knows well. Did maybe Jethro realize that Moses had been carrying an extraordinary burden? Who knows? Something else caught my attention. Throughout the chapter, the Torah keeps reminding us that Jethro is the priest of Midian. I believe he says it 3 times, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Of course, he is Moses' father-in-law, but the Torah never lets us forget that he is also an experienced religious leader. He understands religious leadership. He understands communities, and he understands what it means to care for the people in his charge. Rashi also notices something else that I thought was really neat. Earlier in Exodus, Moses is identified by his relationship to Jethro. Moses is the young shepherd living under his father-in-law's care. But here, the relationship reverses. Now, Jethro is introduced as Moses' father-in-law. Moses has grown from refugee in Midian to the leader and king of God's people. My favorite part of the chapter comes when Moses tells Jethro everything that has happened. What struck me is that Moses doesn't make himself the hero of the story. He keeps telling Jethro what God has done. And that makes perfect sense if you look at it from Moses' perspective. In fact, think about it. Moses had probably raised a shepherd's staff thousands of times in his life, and nothing miraculous had ever happened. I can buy a Harry Potter wand from Universal and raise it in every corner, but nothing miraculous is ever going to happen. But then God says, raise your staff to Moses, and the sea parts. I believe that Moses knows exactly who deserves the credit. And throughout this chapter, Moses understands that this is God's story more than his own. But then this chapter changes a little bit. Jethro watches Moses spend the entire day judging the people and says something remarkably blunt, especially when previously he called Moses king. What you are doing is not good. He just comes out and says it. I don't think Jethro is criticizing Moses himself. I think he is criticizing Moses' system. So I had to do some research, and Sforno finally helped me understand this. He explains that Jethro watched Moses first dealing with matters affecting the entire nation, then the leaders and the dignitaries, and then only after all of that was done, he finally was able to begin hearing the problems of ordinary people. That means that people would spend the entire day into the night waiting for just a few minutes with Moses. As I was reading that, I couldn't help thinking about my time as a paralegal. Sometimes you would arrive at a court first thing in the morning and you would sit there all day waiting for your case to be called. And it never failed. Sometimes it did not get called until 4 in the afternoon. By then, everyone is exhausted, cranky, tired. Everyone just wants to leave. And that is exactly what Jethro sees. He doesn't just tell Moses, you're going to wear yourself out, which he absolutely is. He says, you will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people. So Jethro had the insight that by doing things the way he was doing them, it was a detriment to not only the leader, but the people he was leading. And that verse really stood out to me. Leadership doesn't always affect the leader. It affects everyone. When the leadership or the leader person becomes exhausted, the whole community feels it. And when the leader is healthy, the people benefit as well. One of the things we learn in military leadership is that no commander succeeds completely alone. Every leader needs someone they trust enough to tell them the truth. Moses had lived with Jethro for years. Jethro had accepted him long before he became Israel's leader. Moses had every reason to trust that whatever Jethro was saying came from genuine concern. So I also wondered a little bit about, is there anyone else who could have given Moses this advice? And when you think about it clearly, there were no experienced Israelite leaders who could have ever led a free nation before. So Moses couldn't use what he had learned in Pharaoh's court either, because Egypt ruled through a very different kind of system. Jethro, however, had spent his life leading a community as the priest of Midian. He was uniquely qualified to recognize that Moses' system simply could not continue. One commentary that I read from Ibn Ezra answered the question that had been bothering me from the beginning. Why is this chapter here? He points out that the Torah places Jethro immediately after the story of Amalek. And that was a striking contrast, because Amalek was an outsider who attacks Israel. Jethro, in his land, lives right next to Amalek. It could be very easy, or Jethro could have been pressured to side with Amalek because they're territorial neighbors. But Amalek, who's the outsider who attacks Israel, Jethro comes, and he is an outsider who blesses Israel. He is known as the person who knows all the gods, and the person who knows all the gods, proclaiming that the God that Moses worshiped is a true God, is saying something. Amalek comes with war. Jethro comes with wisdom. The Torah intentionally places those two responses side by side. And then comes Sinai. That made me realize something important. Jethro does not teach Moses the Torah. Only God does that. What Jethro teaches Moses is how to lead the people and get the system set up so they can receive the Torah. Because you can't have a legal document, a legal constitution, a legal book, a legal code if you have no system to administer it. So before the covenant has to come the leadership. Before the law has to come the organization. And before God gives Israel hundreds of commandments, Moses has to learn that he cannot carry the entire nation by himself. And for me, that is why Exodus 18 belongs where it does. It isn't just a story about delegation. It's a story about humility. It's a story about listening to wise counsel. It's a story about developing a honest legal system. And it reminds us that even the greatest leaders need someone they trust to say, what you're doing isn't good. Lo tov, not good, lo tov. Sometimes the greatest act of leadership is not carrying everything around yourself. And Moses listened. Sometimes it is having the wisdom and the humility to let others help carry the work. Thank you.